on. Yeah, it's on. Hello? Hello? Okay. A little closer. Got it. Good morning, everyone. We're going to begin here, so please take your seats and quiet down. Thank you for coming. My name is Megan Haydett. I am a program specialist at the National Institute of Food and Agriculture. And I'd like to welcome you all to NIFA Listens, Investing in Science to Transform Lives. This is a listening opportunity where NIFA has invited speakers from around the country to participate and let us know about your top priorities, challenges, and needed breakthroughs in science research, education, and extension that NIFA can address. We want to hear from you. This is all about the participants here. So, given that, we are going to give a short presentation at the beginning about this listening effort, and then we're going to proceed as if this was a public comment session. So we have an agenda. I hope you picked one up outside. And that is our guide for the day. We have registered speakers. Some will be using PowerPoint, but we also have room at the end of our agenda for any unscheduled speakers. So if you feel inspired, please let us know, and we can add you on at the end of the day. This presentation is being recorded and webcast, so I ask that you stay at the podium here while making your presentation, so the viewers at home or online can see everyone. We invite each speaker to talk for up to 10 minutes. We have some reminder slides up here. We'll be letting you know when you have 5 minutes and 2 minutes remaining. We hope that you stay on topic and are respectful of everyone in the room. So if you need to take a call or have a private conversation, please step outside. The video and transcripts from this NIFA Listen session, as well as the others we are doing this month, will be available on our website in a couple of weeks. We have refreshments. The bathrooms are outside. We will plan on a 10 or 20 minute break around 10:10 this morning. And I think that's about it. Next, I would like to introduce the Deputy Director of the Institute for Bioenergy, Climate, and the Environment, Dr. Louis Tupas.
Thank you for coming. I am Louis Tupas, the Deputy Director of NIFA for Bioenergy, Climate, and Environment. And with me here in Minneapolis from NIFA, I'd like to introduce Dr. Randy Johnson. She is the Division Director for Global Climate Change. And you've all met Ms. Megan Haydett. She is a Program Specialist with the Institute of Food Production and Sustainability. I'd like to introduce also Dr. Lynn Cadiagala. Lynn is over here. She is with our Planning, Accountability, and Reporting staff, and Ms. Felita Lyles with our communication staff. So we're really happy to host you here, and we'd really like to hear from you with regards to the different questions that we have posed in our Federal Register notice. So a little bit of a background about us. We are the extramural science funding agency for USDA. We invest and advance agriculture research, education, and extension. We collaborate with many individuals and organizations to address pressing local, domestic, and global problems. And it is through this process that we would like to make scientific progress to transform the lives of people that we serve. And that's pretty much the country, and to the extent that we can, the world. How do we prioritize what goes into our scientific portfolio? Well, we have four major sources of that input. We get, of course, Congress through the Farm Bill and the appropriation process. We get input from the Secretary of Agriculture down the chain to the Undersecretary of Agriculture for our mission area, as well as from the White House through various means, the Office of Management and Budget, the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and many other places. We also have our own internal stakeholders, which is really the intellectual capacity of our own agency's scientific staff, who are subject matter experts in their own fields, and they have connections with the agriculture scientific community in the states and the territories, with the land grants and other institutions. We also have connections, and we work closely with our other USDA colleagues from different agencies in the department. And then the other source of input are yourselves, our external stakeholders. This process comes through listening sessions such as this, and as well as other areas where I will reach upon in a few minutes. So this is one of the means from which we get stakeholder input from our external partners, collaborators. And this NIFA listening session for this year is focused on these three questions related to the greatest challenge that should be addressed by NIFA in all of agriculture. One that is specific to your field, what is the most needed breakthrough that is necessary? And the breakthroughs include changes in knowledge, technology, or behavior. And the other question we're asking is, what is your top priority in this enterprise? And we have a website here, https NIFA Listens, that you can access this information as well. We have an electronic opportunity for you to provide this input all the way until November 30, 2018. Please go to that website, and you will be able to have another opportunity to provide input all the way until November 30. This is the third of our in-person events. We will have one more in Albuquerque, New Mexico on November 1st. So your input is highly valued. We would like it to inform the prioritization of our science emphasis areas. We would like it to inform us about the gaps in our scientific programming, and also determine which of our programs are underperforming or could be redundant. And combined with the input from our staff and from USDA and all those other sources that I mentioned, we will create our current science emphasis areas to identify the gaps in our portfolios and look at our potential future investments. So anyway, what did we hear in 2017? Well, did I advance that? Just excuse me. Yeah, sorry. So what we heard in 2017 are two big areas. One involved systems where the input was focused on the big challenges facing agriculture that require a systems approach. And these systems include economic, social, and all those other systems involved. So we're really looking for transdisciplinary systems, and that was the input we heard. The other input that we heard from a very large audience was regards to data and technology as solutions to manage agricultural systems. This includes data and technology that will help extension, education, and community development, as well as those that need to strengthen communication between research and extension. So those were two of the major topics we heard in 2017. About 40% of the input that we received were focused on each of them. And if we look at the demographics of those inputs, we had close to 600 responses in different forms. 383 were of our personal opinions, and we received 216 from organizations. This is just a breakdown of the demographics. Universities were the primary source of our input during the 2017 listening sessions. And then we also heard from other nonprofit organizations. And the other, which is the third category in the bar chart, others included research institutions, community-based organizations, regional associations, and quasi-state community commodity commissions. So those are the demographics of our last year's listening session. And then you will see later on, as Megan indicated, the results of our NIFA listens for 2018 will be posted in a few weeks after we conclude the last one. So the top 20 science priority themes with their percentage, I talked about data and technology. Plant production was fairly high on the list, sustainability, agroecology, and we considered everything down the line to controlled environmental agriculture. But all of these comments are taken into consideration. We just rank them here based on the number of comments that were received last year. So on the first theme of data and technology, 124 organizations and 118 personal input. 40% of all the comments were on this topic, and you can see a graphic of how the different ideas under data were grouped together. The major areas included data itself, genomics, precision agriculture, diagnostics, all the way down to sensors. So we have really a big mix of ideas under that theme of data and technology. Under the theme of plant production, you can see here how it's broken up, and you can see how the words that were used went into the graphic here, crops and crop, obviously, but we also were provided input with regards to soil health, ecosystem services, all the way to plant breeding. So those were the common related areas under plant production, but as you can see, there are many other areas aside from those two that were presented. I just presented the top two, but we have all these types of science priority themes that were provided, and we'd really like to hear from you, your views for this year. So to find more about NIFA Listens, this is last year, so that's the website where you can go to last year's, and we will have our 2018 information up after we end these listening sessions. And really thank you for coming. We look forward to listening to what you have to say. In order for us to have a transcript of this, we are recording this session. It's being actually broadcast live to our staff back in Washington, D.C. So we'd really like to hear from you, and thank you again.
All right, so now we are going to begin with the agenda, continue with the agenda. And first up, we have Christina Hubbard from the Organic Seed Alliance.
Good morning. Can everyone hear me? Thank you to NIFA for the opportunity to provide public comments today. I traveled here from Missoula, Montana, mostly for the USDA's National Organic Standards Board meeting happening this week across town in St. Paul, and I'm thrilled to be able to weigh in on the critical research priorities that are in discussion today here. I work for Organic Seed Alliance. We are a mission-driven organization that aims to help organic farmers find the seed they need to be successful through research, education, and policy advocacy. Our plant breeding work emphasizes farmer participation to ensure we're meeting the diverse and regional needs of growers, supporting choice in the seed marketplace, and helping farmers add economic value to their farms, and in return, their rural communities. Organic Seed Alliance is involved in about a dozen participatory plant breeding projects. One example is the Northern Organic Vegetable Improvement Collaborative, or NOVIC. We are working with Cornell University, University of Wisconsin-Madison, Oregon State University, and Washington State University in this work to breed new varieties of vegetable crops that are appropriate for organic and other low-input production systems across the northern tier. This project has already released several new varieties to the organic seed marketplace. It has trained about a dozen graduate students in organic plant breeding skills. And the project has hosted 80 workshops for farmers in 19 states focused on on-farm plant breeding techniques and organic seed production. Thankfully, this project just received its third round of funding from a NIFA program, the Organic Research and Extension Initiative, or OREI, which will allow this project to have an even bigger impact. Access to seed that is appropriate for organic systems is especially critical for organic growers since they rely even more on advanced plant genetics to support production challenges, given that their toolbox is smaller in terms of limitations in sprays and other allowable controls. The demand for Organic Seed Alliance's research and education services grows each year. We cannot meet the demand among farmers who are interested in engaging in participatory plant breeding projects to expand choice in seed for their local climates and environmental conditions, in addition to demand to build their skills in growing seed for the commercial seed trade. It's important for me to note that we couldn't do much of our breeding work without the support of our land-grant university partners, which is why it's troubling that the infrastructure in many of our land grants has greatly diminished over the years, impacting the output of public cultivars and new public breeders and slowing the response to the diverse needs of farmers, especially at the regional level. As an organic research organization, I want to emphasize the importance of prioritizing research funding for organic production systems to support this growing sector of agriculture. Many of you probably know that consumer demand for organic products continues to grow nearly 10% annually since the inception of the federal rules in 2002. U.S. organic sales have reached about $50 billion, with nearly 27,000 family farms and businesses represented. This growth is certainly encouraging since organic farming has provided many growers the opportunity to diversify their production, take advantage of a more lucrative market, and improve the health of their soil and local bioregion. But unfortunately, domestic production is not keeping pace with this demand, and increasingly we are relying on more organic imports. We view this as a missed economic opportunity for U.S. growers, and we think it's important that USDA helps to address challenges hindering growth in U.S. organic production. NIFA plays an important role in this effort because investing in organic research is central to supporting more domestic organic production. And because the focus on soil health and alternative pest and disease management strategies for organic growers benefits conventional or non-org growers alike, the benefits are much broader than just supporting the organic farming community. Unfortunately, over the past 5 years, while overall funding for ag research has grown significantly, funding for organic research has stagnated. For example, the OREI program that I mentioned earlier that many of you are probably familiar with has been funded at $20 million annually since fiscal year 2010. In addition, according to USDA's own data provided to Congress, funding for organic research within USDA's flagship competitive research program, the Ag and Food Research Initiative, or AFRI, has averaged about 0.2% annually over the 5-year period of 2011-2015, averaged that percentage toward organic research. The AFRI program is intended to serve the agricultural research needs across all U.S. agriculture sectors, but it's clearly falling short with regard to organic. The new Farm Bill being debated by Congress right now offers hope that there will be more funding for OREI, but NIFA can and should do more to increase funding for organic research across the competitive research grant program areas. In addition to prioritizing organic research more broadly, NIFA should also be placing a higher priority on the use of USDA competitive grant programs to fund projects that expand farmer access to more public cultivars that are regionally adapted to their farming systems, soil conditions, and climates. Because of the number of USDA research programs that can and should be making public cultivar development a higher priority, we believe that USDA should consider appointing a staff person to oversee these efforts across the many relevant research programs at USDA. The private seed sector is doing many things well, but there are many more gaps in the way of underserved crops and markets that the public sector is best suited to fill. There's a common sentiment from a wide array of farmers, not only organic farmers, that there is a need for more public cultivar options. Furthermore, access to more diverse and regionally appropriate cultivars supports larger societal goals as well, including food security, climate change adaptation, drought tolerance, biodiversity, and nutrient and flavor enhancements for consumers as well. We also believe that USDA should track grants that result in finished public cultivars separately from genomic and molecular genetics activities. We are supportive of genomics and molecular research that often helps us better understand plants and traits, but we currently do not have data for identifying the public funding stream going toward farmer-ready cultivars. This tracking system should provide a more accurate assessment of USDA's commitment to public cultivar development and can certainly inform public plant breeding research priorities as well. Cultivars developed with public support should also be kept in the public domain. That is, we believe they should not be protected by restrictive intellectual property rights that disallow further research, germplasm sharing, and seed saving among the farming community. This will ensure broader access to improved genetics and encourage more innovation in our public institutions and on our farms. We have found in our own research program that farmers are some of the best innovators. I also want to emphasize that public cultivar funding needs to be longer term to reflect the time required to produce improved cultivars. Cultivar development, unlike other types of research, cannot be started and stopped based on a 3-year granting cycle, which is one of the reasons why we're so pleased that we got a 3rd round of funding for the Novik project I mentioned earlier. Cultivar development is rapid only when programs are continuous. We also need to train and mentor the next generation of public plant breeders to continue the highly successful and long history of public cultivar development and to better stabilize our land-grant university base. I recently had the privilege to attend a student-led event called the Student Organic Seed Symposium. This is a symposium that is initiated and organized by and for plant breeding graduate students who are interested in future careers in plant breeding and who have an interest in supporting organic farmers. Many of these students will graduate soon and be looking for jobs, and a common theme in my conversations with them was a very real concern that public plant breeding positions will not be an option for them. Many want to conduct field-based plant breeding in the public sector. Many want to fill gaps in minor crops and markets such as organic, and many already during their short time as students understand the barriers to doing this work in the public sector. I just want to close by mentioning that the National Organic Standards Board meeting that I referenced at the beginning of my comments works hard to collect comments from the organic community to inform their own research priority agenda. So I also encourage NIFA to collaborate closely with the National Organic Program, advised by the National Organic Standards Board, to fulfill some of the highest priority research topics that have come from the public comment period and that have been organized and again prioritized by the National Organic Standards Board, which is an advisory board overseeing the organic standards. Thanks again for this opportunity.
Thank you. Next up is Peter Morrill from the University of Minnesota.
So I'm Peter Morrill. I'm a faculty member in agronomy and plant genetics here at the University of Minnesota, and my official job title is computational biologist, which I think will be evident in my talk. I have a relatively small number of slides, but I think it will help illustrate some of what I want to talk about. So I just want to talk about 3 topics really quickly. That one is a research opportunity, and the others are sort of in terms of opportunities for training and building a workforce that can be involved in agricultural research. So So the first topic is harnessing the recombination process, and as I'll explain, there are limits on selection that are quite important, and recombination is a process over which we still have relatively limited control and ability to manipulate. I'll also talk just a little bit about data science and the opportunity for better use of interdisciplinary research opportunities and an ability to attract students from other disciplines. And finally, I'll talk just for a moment about diversity of the STEM workforce and the chance to expand educational opportunities. So the recombination process, of course, has been a major part of plant breeding and genetic mapping and other activities for a very long time, and it remains important. But in an era where targeted genetic modification has become routine, the recombination process remains stochastic, and crossover events are quite limited. They generally occur as one per chromosome arm per generation, and there are regions of the genome, this is barley chromosome 7, there are regions of the genome where the probability of crossover is very low, and there are limitations to the amount of crossover that occurs. So in one of the most famous results that applies to plant and animal breeding, selection then, the process of link selection means that selection ends up acting on the aggregate of variants with both positive and negative effects on organismal fitness and therefore yield. And so the lack of ability to have some control over the rates of recombination and where recombination events occur and the ability to separate individual genetic variants limits our ability to make genetic gains in plant and animal breeding efforts. So in one application that my lab has worked on, and this is a relatively new area that I'll talk about just briefly, there is the potential to remove deleterious load or deleterious variants, genetic variants that have an impact on fitness and reduce organismal fitness. So all of us have several hundred genetic variants that if they were homozygous, meaning we had gotten the same copy from mom and dad, we would be dead. So there is a reasonable question as to why aren't we all dead 100 times over, and it's partly because mom and dad weren't that closely related. But in plants and animals, that same process occurs. And in inbred plants, they can carry many of these variants in the homozygous state, meaning they have two copies of those variants, and so that eliminates or it reduces yield. So, excuse me, in this example, we looked at a barley genomic prediction experiment, and essentially lines that carry fewer of these homozygous deleterious variants have higher yield. So as many of you know, it's been very hard to find variants that positively affect yield, but we found a class of genetic variants which when you reduce them, actually lead to higher yield. And so we can readily identify these variants in the genome because they are at phylogenetically conserved sites, places where amino acids don't change very much over evolutionary history. And producing plants and animals with lower deleterious load or lower mutational load, it's called sometimes, is a path forward for plant and animal breeding. So we have, of course, targeted modification, and targeted modification can be used, as I'll mention on the next slide, in this process. But so this is CRISPR's, TALEN's, other techniques. But we still are limited in the total number of variants that can be eliminated by targeted modifications and by the process of recombination and independent assortment. So some of my colleagues also working on this topic that were interested in targeted genetic modification have recently published a preprint with a terrific title, Removal of Alleles by Genome Editing, or RAGE, Against the Deleterious Load. So one way to remove harmful variants is actually to use genome editing techniques to edit them out. The challenge with that is that there are thousands of these variants in an individual barley line, for example. So a more a more effective way, according to this paper, is that performing truncating selection for individuals with reduced load can actually, so picking individuals that we know have fewer deleterious variants is a practical approach to removing that load. So, and this is just an example from barley where you see those red dots across the top of each of these chromosomes are the deleterious variants. So even along regions of the genome, like these edges of chromosomes that have high recombination, there are large numbers of deleterious variants that can potentially be removed, but there are limitations on how many can be removed in any generation. The other area I want to talk about, to do the sort of work that I just showed you requires people involved in agricultural genetics and genomics, but even within my single laboratory, it involves students and scientists with a wide array of backgrounds from biochemistry, computer science, evolutionary and population genetics, molecular biology, statistics, and we've had people from all of those disciplines in our lab. And there is an opportunity in a changing environment where we're facing big challenges like climate change to recruit students who are very talented from other disciplines who find our area of research quite exciting. And they bring a lot of new energy. And one mechanism for this, I know NIFA is involved in this, but increased emphasis on undergraduate and graduate interdisciplinary research funding is a real opportunity to grow these fields with people who bring a real serious skill set to the table a lot of times. And finally, it's important to note that, and again, this is something that NIFA has been involved in, but there is a lot of untapped talent in our STEM workforce that could be a part of our STEM workforce. This is participation of blacks and Hispanics, a Pew Charitable Trust study. Black and Hispanic students and communities are still very much underrepresented in STEM, and particularly in the areas that are most important to the sort of work we're doing in math, the life sciences, and computers. We're actually doing a little bit better than some other fields, but these groups are still, for example, Hispanics are still dramatically underrepresented compared to what they could be in those fields. So there is a lot of opportunity to grow our areas by recruiting talented students from these communities. And again, through funding for undergraduate, graduate, and postgraduate research. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Adam Skyla from the Genome Writers Guild.
It's been almost a quarter century since the first genetically engineered food entered the US market. Since then, genetic engineering has become deeply rooted in the agricultural system. Thank you. Since then, genetic engineering has become deeply rooted in the agricultural system. Hello, my name is Adam Skyla. I'm a first-year graduate student here at the University of Minnesota and an executive officer of the Genome Writers Guild. I was the first in my family to pursue a post-secondary education. And I decided to continue on to get a doctoral degree, focusing on the field of genome engineering, because I look around at the world that humans have created, at the impacts that we've had, and I can't help but be in awe. And that doesn't mean we're finished yet either. We can always continue to strive for better results, to change our impacts to be more positive. So why genome engineering? Genome engineering has opened up possibilities that we didn't even know existed. Just looking at the impacts it had in agriculture clearly demonstrates this. There are tried and true solutions like insect resistance that have helped bridge the gap between potential and actual yield, aiding in environmental sustainability and economic returns. But the past 2 decades have seen unprecedented advances in the specificity and rationality by which we write genomes. The tools now available allow for genome engineering in agriculture to push far beyond just economic returns. I, for example, was able to work on engineering a faster test for foodborne illness. Plant-based pharmaceuticals, biofuels, And environment-resistant plants are just the beginning too. Even some of the most difficult limiting factors, like uncontrolled gene flow, can be addressed. I recently started working in the Szymanski lab here at the University of Minnesota, engineering synthetic speciation, a system that would allow for bidirectional control of gene flow while also allowing the engineered strains to propagate. This would open doors to engineering new traits that are currently either restricted or completely inviable. A little over a year ago, I joined the then nascent Genome Writers Guild. I see genetic engineering as a powerful technology that can help all of humanity and the world we live in. So any discussion about it should include everyone, scientists, government agencies, as well as members of the public. I felt that the Genome Writers Guild would be an organization that would be able to catalyze this sort of conversation. Early on, I led the writing of the mission statement and the bylaws, and soon became an executive officer where I've worked diligently to seeing the broadest impact possible. I ran the first ever public outreach event, as well as aided in registering the group as a nonprofit, creating the website, and running the annual conference. And it's clear that people really want to have this kind of dialogue. The Genome Writers Guild has students who are willing to open discussions with politicians, artists, businesswomen, and people who are simply curious coming together to discuss genetic engineering because it matters to them. The Genome Writers Guild represents a future of responsible genome engineering. Responsible genome engineering that is not only communicated to the public, but occurs with their input. Genome engineering that allows for advancement, reinvestment, and progress. So I wasn't really asked to speak here today by anyone in particular, except maybe NIFA. I came here to advocate for genetic engineering because I believe in its potential to address some of the greatest challenges in agriculture. Human health, food security, environmental sustainability, and even the US economy are all deeply tied together. And it's not a matter of investing in one of these, but investing in all of them. Continued work in genetic engineering can aid in addressing these issues. Education, broad public outreach, and scientific investment around genetic technologies will bring students like me and others together to find the solutions to these toughest problems, bring their insight, and help change the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I invite anyone that's come in the last few minutes since we got started, if you have a presentation, feel free to stop by the AV table at the back of the room. Next up, we have George Smith from Michigan State University.
Good morning. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to testify at today's stakeholder listening session on emerging needs and opportunities in food and agricultural sciences. I have the pleasure of serving as both the Associate Dean for Research in the MSU College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, as well as Associate Director of MSU Ag Bioresearch. I have the pleasure of assisting in oversight of MSU's research portfolio in the areas of food, energy, and the environment, encompassing the work of over 350 faculty in 8 different colleges on the Michigan State University campus. There is perhaps no more important time than now to be involved in unearthing solutions that will keep our food supply safe, secure, and sustainable. As a land-grant university, MSU remains committed to discovering practical, adoptable solutions that address the challenges facing our food and agriculture industries in Michigan, in the United States, and impact across the globe. And certainly partnerships with the USDA NIFA through capacity funding and through the Agriculture and Food Research Initiative Competitive Grants Program are critical to future impacts of Michigan State University scientists in solving some of the grand challenges which we're here to discuss today. With more than 300 commodities commercially produced in the state of Michigan, we're the second most diverse agricultural state in the country, only behind California. MSU College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, MSU Ag Bioresearch, and MSU Extension work hand in hand with the state's commodity organizations to address issues and challenges facing our growers and producers in the state of Michigan with implications applicable worldwide. Key findings from our research have facilitated growth in the food and agriculture economy in the state of Michigan, growing from $88 billion annually about 8 years ago to over $104 billion of annual economic impact in the state. And again, we couldn't have done that without the support of programs from USDA NIFA capacity funding to help support our scientists and a host of competitive grants programs that provide the funds to help address practical challenges in the state of Michigan and beyond. As I mentioned, diversity is a cornerstone of agriculture in Michigan, in the United States, now and in the future. Diversity not only in commodities produced, but also in farm size, production systems, and operational goals. We believe it is paramount that the USDA research agenda for the future reflect all of these different types of diversity. So we were tasked for this listening session to address three, what you could call somewhat challenging questions. So the first, what I would like to address is what we feel is the top priority for NIFA in food and agricultural research, extension, and education. So in considering the foundational principles critical to confronting challenges facing U.S. agriculture for the next 50 years and beyond, it's important to keep in mind programs and principles that have propelled advancements in productivity and sustainability of U.S. agriculture during the past decades. Foundational to that is the USDA Agriculture and Food Research Initiative, the flagship competitive grants program at USDA NIFA, that's benefited the nation by providing America's farmers and foresters with genomic data and biotechnology tools to expand food and fiber production, processing, international trade, healthcare professionals with insights into relationships between diet and health, farmers, landowners, and ranchers with expanded knowledge about soil and water quality, university funding to train the next generation of food, agriculture, and natural resource scientists and cooperative extension educators. So, basic research programs such as the Foundational Grants Program at AFRI, we feel are the top priority for NIFA and food and agricultural research in the future. They're of paramount importance to scientific advancement and sustainability of U.S. agriculture. The fundamental knowledge generated through programs like this are critical to many of the advancement driving growth and increased productivity and sustainability of agriculture in Michigan and beyond. For example, in the state of Michigan, milk production per cow has increased more than 90% since 2000, milk production in general and per cow. Michigan now ranks second in the nation in average milk production per cow and about 8th globally, nationally in terms of total milk production. This growth is directly linked to improvements in reproductive performance, feed efficiency, genetic selection, and animal health, made possible by an underlying foundation of basic research. That foundation of basic research is critical to solving the problems we face in the next decades. A rigorous basic research agenda, as I said, remains critical to solving the challenges of coming decades and beyond. Some of those challenges I will outline. However, I also need to mention that continued applied research in foundational areas, including greater emphasis on production efficiency, is also critical to the future of agriculture. As we're certainly in a climate now economically where a lot of our commodities are produced in excess, and we need to provide tools to help our farmers and ranchers look more closely at how to maintain production with lower input costs. So a balance of applied and basic research portfolios are critical to the future. USDA NIFA must also continue to support existing partnerships and develop new and effective ones with other federal agencies as well as foundations and private industry to increase funding opportunities for agricultural research and significantly leverage available funding annually for competitive grants. I'm guessing we get no arguments from anyone in the room that agricultural research is currently unfunded in the country. And certainly while we would all love for there to increase funding to NIFA for agricultural research, it's important that we also look to partnerships and ways to encourage other agencies to invest in agricultural research that's also of fundamental interest to the goals of NIFA and agriculture in this country. And that is one of the reasons why I remain deeply concerned about the proposed relocation of NIFA out of the Beltway for the impact that will have on existing and future partnerships. So with that, I'll move on. So we're also asked to address the greatest challenge to be addressed in agriculture. That's a really, really difficult question. In addressing that question, we need to look at the diversity of agriculture and its complexity and the numerous threats our industries face. In developing a long-term research agenda for U.S. food and agriculture, it's important to consider both opportunities and overarching threats. Technological advancement in big data provides an opportunity for innovation and rapid growth in productivity, production, efficiency within the agricultural sector, and should be paramount to a future research agenda focused on addressing challenges in the next decade. Fundamentally, I feel there's a pressing need to train the next generation of scientists who can effectively work at the intersection of agriculture, engineering, and computation, and for a need for a greater recognition overall of agriculture as a STEM discipline. In terms of threats, a major research priority linked to many significant challenges facing U.S. food and agriculture production is understanding resilience, or more specifically, mechanisms that confer resistance to abiotic and biotic stress in plants, animals, and microorganisms. In my home state of Michigan and for the Michigan agricultural industries, climate change is real. For example, prolonged very early periods of warm weather followed by rapidly decreasing temperatures can wipe out our significant specialty crop industry in a matter of days with little to no alternatives or viable ways to combat. The same is true for agronomic crops when we look at prolonged periods of drought or heavy rainfall. Accompanying such variability in weather, it's not only weather, is emergence of new invasive pests such as spotted-winged Drosophila, which is having a huge effect on our specialty crop industries in the state of Michigan. And there's very, very limited tools at best to combat these new and emerging threats. So, key to addressing these problems, and that relates to the third question about most needed breakthroughs in technologies, is development of new, more resilient varieties of specialty crops and agricultural commodities in general, plants and animals, with resistance to abiotic and biotic stresses. I feel that's one of the grand challenges facing agriculture that NIFA should address in the future that's critical to growth and sustainability of our industries and feeding a growing population worldwide. So linked closely to the previous research priority is the need for new tools to combat resistance to commonly used herbicides and insecticides to control weeds in agronomic crops and to control pests and pathogens that threaten multiple aspects of food and agriculture production. Once just a topic for science fiction, antimicrobial resistance has now become a significant issue for agricultural, human, and environmental health, and animal and plant-based production agriculture in general. Combating this threat will require a truly integrated, multidisciplinary approach involving scientists from diverse fields, including animal and human health, plant sciences, engineering, computational sciences, and environmental sciences. Future efforts in antimicrobial resistance research should be focused on the following: development and testing of new production management practices and regimes to reduce the frequency by which antimicrobials are needed in both plants and animals. Development of new biosensor technologies to provide early detection of resistant microorganisms and framework for modeling of transmission on farm into the environment and accompanying risk assessment. Development of diagnostics to accurately determine causative microorganisms mediating disease and their resistant status. This will not only increase efficacy of treatments, but consequently reduce use of ineffective drugs, fungicides, herbicides, and so forth, and prophylactic use of antimicrobials in general, which lead to the problem of resistance. And design of new alternative methods of treatment or prevention of plant and animal disease. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today at this listening session. I want to thank USDA NIFA for our strong partnerships, both in terms of capacity funding provided and competitive funds that are available for research. They've been critical to the impact of Michigan State University scientists on the agricultural sector in Michigan, the United States, and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Jenna Davis from Midwest Dairy.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jenna Davis, and I work for Midwest Dairy, and I also brought along my colleague, Teresa Reps. We are both employed by Midwest Dairy, which is the regional checkoff organization representing dairy farmers from Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Iowa, Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, and Arkansas. And Oklahoma. Can't forget them. But we also bring a unique perspective that we get to wear two hats. And the hat that we are wearing today is for our state trade associations. So with that, I represent our interests in Minnesota Milk, Iowa State Dairy Producers Association, South Dakota Dairy Producers Association, Nebraska State Dairy Association, Missouri, and North Dakota as well in those regards.
So as Jenna said, we're wearing two different hats, and we know that there's a lot of great research that has been done from the checkoff side of things as far as dairy foods research, but we really feel there's an underserved area as far as our state trade associations are concerned in the 6 states that we mentioned when it comes to production research. Dairy is in a struggling state at the moment. It's not a great environment, and we feel that there's a need to help serve our dairy farmers by finding more research dollars that helps our dairy farmers be more sustainable. I mean, as we talk today, we'll lose a few more dairy farms in the United States, and I think there's a great opportunity because dairy has such a broad scope and encompasses everything to really put more emphasis on research related to dairy.
Right, and with that, Teresa mentioned that dairy is very broad in scope. In terms of research, things that impact dairy would be water quality, forage production, animal genetics, genomics, big data, and more. The list continues. So as you can see, we really feel that dairy is kind of the cream of the crop when it comes to a focus of NIFA. And when considering the most needed breakthrough for dairy farmers, we really, first and foremost, must continue to support the research that is related to sustainability. And that includes any type of research for multiple types of dairy farms, whether that be big farms or small farms, conventional or organic. We need to make sure that that research represents all of those sectors in the dairy community. But specifically, where we see that science and technology can lead to breakthroughs, such examples include novel covers for silage piles. It seems kind of silly, but if you drive by a dairy farm, you'll often see a huge pile of forage that will feed those cows for a year covered with a plastic. Is there a way that we can invest dollars that would find a new type of covering that allows for practically no oxygen infiltration? Maybe it's something that's compostable. Maybe it would be using a new type of crop and a new biopolymer. Additionally, we see that direct-fed microbials would offer a great breakthrough for dairy producers. Currently, dairy farmers are very limited in the types of antibiotics that they can use to treat a sick cow. And what if we stepped away from antimicrobials as a whole in our industry? What if we moved to direct-fed microbials? I think the possibilities are limitless, and by focusing research that allows for a greater database of knowing what microbials would be available in terms of direct-fed microbials and unlocking their potential to see how it impacts the cow by promoting and protecting cow health and longevity is something that would really excite our industry as a whole. And finally, the third area of a breakthrough that we identified is focusing more on cover crop production. We really see a need for continued research in the area of cover crops with a focus on an increased crop that has a focus on a higher nutrient yield per acre, also focusing on the benefits of improving water quality and just discovering new options that could also serve as forages for those of us who raise cattle in the United States.
So as if that wasn't complicated enough, the 3 points that Jenna mentioned, the one thing that we'd love to see tie it all together, which maybe leads to the partnerships that we have with our extension agencies in our 6 states that we've talked about, would be how do we communicate these advances in sustainability, particularly in those three areas with consumers. We know that consumers don't respond very well to science, but we have a lot of great science data to back up all of the stuff that we're doing and the stuff that we will be doing in the future. And we would love to see an increased focus on finding those breakthroughs, but communicating those breakthroughs to consumers to help us increase trust.
And finally, we just want to leave with this comment that really the top priority that we see is a focus on dairy, because any research, education, or extension that connects to dairy is ultimately a win for our dairy farmers. And we hope that you'll have another glass of milk and continue to support dairy in all efforts by funding through the NIFA program. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Mitchell Hunter from the University of Minnesota.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mitch Hunter. I'm a postdoc at the University of Minnesota, and I want to talk to you today about a new vision for NIFA programs, especially when it comes to plant production systems, that I'm referring to as farming with continuous living cover. So we're here today to think about the big challenges, the top priorities for NIFA and its programs, and I'm going to focus primarily on the environmental challenges that agriculture faces, but I think that this approach also applies to the productivity challenges that agriculture faces. I just needed to narrow down the talk a little bit. So we all know what these problems are. I'm not going to astonish anyone by saying that we have a challenge of soil erosion, greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, and nutrient pollution. But I think that we don't have a good sense often of the magnitude of these challenges and just how much our systems will need to change to actually get our impacts on the environment down to levels that you could reasonably call sustainable. We often talk about sustainability in terms of a marginal improvement over what we're doing now. Anything that's better than the business as usual scenario is called sustainable. But in reality, if we want to be truly sustainable, we have to get our impacts on the environment down to a level where ecosystems can continue to function. So let's think about it in those pretty hard-nosed terms. And to do that, I'm just going to give a couple of examples. So first, greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. Not surprisingly, these have been increasing over the last few decades. And the projection is that going forward, they'll continue to go up. That's because we're farming more acres, we're using more fertilizer, et cetera, trying to feed a growing population and meet rising demand. So if that's the trajectory that we're on, what do we need to do to hit the goal of actually slowing and avoiding the worst impacts of climate change? Well, it's been proposed that we need to reduce emissions by 80% by 2050. So if you look at the gap between where we're headed and where we need to be, it's pretty dramatic. And you could even argue that we need to go below zero on that chart, because many other sectors are looking to agriculture as a way to actually take carbon out of the atmosphere. So it could be even more dramatic than what we're looking at here. Another example is nutrient pollution from agriculture and its effects on water quality. So using here to illustrate the phosphorus load in the Mississippi River Basin, over the last few decades, it's bounced around a lot, but maybe slowly ticking up, despite a lot of efforts to bring that down. And to meet the Gulf Hypoxia Task Force goal, which is designed to reduce the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, but not eliminate it. So we're not talking about a pristine Gulf of Mexico here. We're just trying to avoid a giant dead zone every year. Requires, again, a really, really drastic shift in trajectory. So a big difference from where we're headed to where we really need to be going. So this, to me, begs the question, how can we bend these curves? How can we change our trajectory? And I think we need a very powerful lever to do that. So this is where I'm trying to think beyond the incremental, beyond the small changes that we today would call sustainability because they're slightly more efficient, but don't actually get us there. And the actual solution will need to be systemic, so that echoes the comments from last year. It needs to be landscape scale. because obviously agriculture happens across the entire landscape, and so these emissions and losses to the environment occur at a landscape scale. Ultimately, it needs to be profitable. Agriculture is a private enterprise, and farmers are not going to adopt willingly very costly and unprofitable practices. So that's important. And finally, it would be nice if this approach had some co-benefits to it, both for farmers, for productivity, and for the environment. So to me, all of these different attributes of the lever that we need point in the direction of continuous living cover systems. And I'm going to explain a little bit about what that means. But basically, these are agricultural systems, especially plant production systems and integrated plant livestock systems that avoid having brown periods in the landscape. So basically, periods where nothing is growing. Today, there's a lot of these brown periods in our cropping systems, especially in northern latitudes like we're in here, where the whole winter is often brown. But also, around the world, as we transition between crops, typically the soil is left bare for a significant amount of time. So just to talk about what this means, what's this difference between a brown period and a green period? And what happens when we shift from one to the other? Well, if you think about the different processes that are going on in the landscape, as we go from one to the other, it's really dramatic. As radiation falls on the soil, if it's uncovered, it simply heats the soil and contributes to global warming. If the soil is covered by a plant, it could contribute to photosynthesis, plant productivity, regenerative processes. When the rain falls in the soil, if it's not covered, it leads to leaching and erosion. If it's covered by a plant, it can supply that plant with water and lead again to plant productivity. Microbial processes. When microbes metabolize organic materials in a soil that's not covered, they burn off carbon, put it back into the atmosphere, and free nutrients that are then available for leaching. In contrast, when that soil is covered, those nutrients, again, go into plant productivity, which can stimulate fixation of carbon and return to the soil. So this difference, this to me, is dramatic enough to potentially be a large enough lever to get us from where we're headed to where we need to go. And I would argue that most of the approaches that we point to as ways to be more sustainable, better nutrient management, for instance, engineering approaches to controlling nutrient losses, are just not dramatic enough to make the difference that we need to make. They're all important, and we need to have a systemic approach where those are included. But to me, this difference is one of the few that I can point to that is of the magnitude of the challenge. So we have a lot of different tools, luckily, at our disposal, and more than ever, I would say, to help achieve this vision. We have cover crops that obviously do a good job of turning brown soil green. And we can extend their benefits by planting green into living cover crops so that at the beginning of a cash crop phase, the soil is already covered. We can also extend their benefits on the back end of the cash crop phase by interseeding into those cash crops and keeping it green after we've harvested that cash crop. We can do similar practices relaying between cash crops, and of course use our traditional perennials such as alfalfa and pastures. And excitingly, we have new perennial options coming on board, including perennial grains. Here I'm showing Kernza intermediate wheatgrass, which is a crop that I work on. And so this gives us many of the environmental benefits of perennials, as well as annual, yearly production of a grain crop for human consumption. So we have a lot of these tools, and yet we also know that we can't just go snap our fingers and implement all of these practices on the landscape in a way that's practical and profitable at the current moment. That's why we need NIFA to prioritize this vision in their research programs to help us move forward. So I'd like to talk about a model that we have here at the University of Minnesota of this multidisciplinary integrated research and development effort. It's called the Forever Green Initiative, and really it takes the approach that we need to go from the very beginning of the process with genomics and breeding all the way to the end use to get this done. On the genetics and breeding side, we need new crops and new cultivars that can exploit these different niches in the cropping system with a profitable crop that farmers have an incentive to grow. And to do that, we need our geneticists and breeders to develop these cultivars with high yield, high quality, and good hardiness and reliability. Then we need the folks who work on management to figure out how to plant and harvest this. So these are the agronomists, agricultural engineers, pest management specialists. How do we fertilize and manage the pests in these systems? And then how do we link them all together through relay rotations that transition between crops without leaving the soil vulnerable and bare and brown. And then we want to go into the end use. We need to understand the end use. How do you store these new crops? How do you process them? How do you develop food products that consumers want to buy using these crops that keep the soil covered with green plants? And then how do we market these and develop full value chains? And as I said, there's an initiative at the University of Minnesota called the Forever Green Initiative that is really pioneering this model. We've got food scientists, we've got geneticists and breeders, we have agronomists like myself, all working together on different teams focused on a wide range of crops, perennial crops, including native woody crops, as well as winter annual crops that are essentially cash cover crops that we can produce and get the benefits of cover crops, but also still sell and again give that economic incentive to farmers. So I'm coming to the end of my time. I was going to talk a little bit about my work on intermediate wheatgrass or kernza, but I think I'm going to generally leave it by saying I see this as a real opportunity to start to bend those curves. It's of the magnitude. This change in the landscape is of the magnitude that we need, where a lot of the incremental approaches can be integrated into this approach, but on their own won't do the job. So I'd encourage everyone to check out the Forever Green Initiative. Just need to acknowledge the leader of that initiative is a professor at the University of Minnesota named Don Weiss. He's done a lot to put these teams together. So I want to thank him and also just all the different people at the university who are working on this initiative together. Thank you.
All right. Next up, we have Ryan McNaney. Are you here, Ryan? Okay. How about Mary Meyer from the University of Minnesota? Wonderful.
Good morning. Welcome to Minnesota. All of you who are not from Minnesota, we're glad to have you here. Thank you for bringing us a normal weather day. Is this normal in Minnesota with our rigorous climate? I'm a professor at the University of Minnesota, and I work in horticulture. So horticulture enters every home every day. So you might be thinking, gee, does it really? Yeah, so what'd you have for breakfast this morning? Hopefully a little bit more horticulture than the cranberries in the scones we had, but of course I appreciated those cranberries in the scones. Let's see, where do we move here? So if horticulture does not enter our homes every day, we have people that are less healthy, more likely to become ill or stay ill, or less likely to be able to work. If you are not close to horticulture every day, your life is less happy, less comfortable, more stressed, and in general, I feel, most people would agree with this, less fulfilling and worthwhile. So do you have this view outside your home or outside your office window? Or how about outside your hospital window if you are not feeling so good? How about this view? Like this view? How about this one? Or how about this one? This is close to the view outside my window. I have one of the best offices at the University of Minnesota at the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum. So I also have an office on campus, and when I tell people I'm a professor, they say, what do you teach? But then when I say, I work at the Arboretum, people say, oh, wow, I love that place. So this is what horticulture does for us. So you asked us to answer 3 questions. So the first question, what's the greatest challenge? This is what I feel our greatest challenge is. Efficient horticulture or agriculture production with no damage to the environment. So thank you, Mitch, for all your help with talking about how agriculture and horticulture does damage our environment. We know that agriculture is a necessity. We just have to learn how to do our production with the least damage to the environment. What's our most needed breakthrough? I would say efficient, low-cost, year-round production of plants, especially food plants, in cold climates. So stick around in Minnesota a little longer. You won't be seeing too many things growing outside without a lot of protection and a lot of care. So this is something that I feel we could change. Yes, these are Minnesota peaches by a person I just happened to come upon who was bragging about his Minnesota peaches at one time. Above the ruler are the Minnesota peaches. Below is a peach from California. So we really can produce a lot of great crops here and have made great strides in this, but we have a long ways to go. And the top priority, I feel, affordable, available, and sustainable production of fruits, vegetables, and other horticulture crops for everyone, regardless of where you live or what your income is. So how about a garden at every hospital? This week in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article about this, food as medicine. So this is what we know in horticulture to be true. We know and understand that a plant-based diet is good for all of us. We're just beginning to really understand this. But this is a quote from the Wall Street Journal. Hospital patients are heading home with a sheaf of prescriptions, a bag of spinach, and spaghetti squash. And the article talks about having a garden at every hospital. But better than a garden at every hospital is a garden at every school, because if we had children that grew up gardening, we know that they eat more vegetables when they garden, and also they garden for life and then eat plants for the rest of their life. So we have two wonderful initiatives across the horticultural field that are going on now and have come about in the last couple of years. This is the National Initiative for Consumer Horticulture. I urge you to look at this initiative online. This is a consortium to raise the profile of horticulture, especially consumer horticulture, which has no voice in and of itself, to come here today and speak. And the second one is Seed Your Future. Seed Your Future is about instilling horticulture into the lives of middle and high school students. So this is Longwood Gardens and Ball Horticultural Company, along with American Society of Horticultural Science, that I used to be the president of, started this a few years ago. So Seed Your Future will now reach hundreds of thousands of students through the scholastic program in high schools talking about horticulture. So thank you for coming to Minnesota. Thank you for taking the time to listen today. We certainly appreciate all the money you've put into horticulture and the specialty crops research funding. We've just begun to research the wonder of horticulture, which will ensure a healthier and happier world for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. We're running a bit ahead of schedule, so I would like to ask if Kenneth Olson is here. You ready to go? Wonderful.
Thank you. Good morning. First, I'd like to thank the organizers for providing this opportunity to provide input for all stakeholders relative to the direction of research funded through USDA and NIFA. It's been an important function of USDA in the past, and it continues to be for the future. My name is Ken Olson. I'm a dairy scientist and hold a PhD in dairy cattle breeding or population genetics from the University of Wisconsin at Madison. I've been an extension specialist and a full professor in the Animal Science Department at the University of Kentucky, the National Dairy and Animal Health Specialist for the American Farm Bureau Federation, member of the National Animal Health Emergency Management Steering Committee for APHIS, outreach coordinator for the Owney's Disease Integrated Program, or JDIP, a NIFA CAP program. Currently work as the outreach coordinator for the Mycobacterial Diseases of Animals Multi-State Initiative, another NIFA program. I'm outreach coordinator for the American Dairy Science Association and science policy coordinator for FASS, working with the Science Policy Committee. Now, I raise these not because of what I've done, but to demonstrate the fact that I've worked with USDA and NIFA in a variety of roles, a variety of ways over many years. Worked both as a researcher, seeking competitive grants, and also working with producers as far as identifying priorities. So I think it's perhaps a somewhat unique perspective that's brought to the table. Now, one thing that has been mentioned previously is the proposed reorganization of NIFA. We recognize that this is something that you don't necessarily control, but it is a concern for FASS and for the folks that I work with. We recognize that many communities, including the one where I live, have indicated an interest in hosting NIFA. But we feel it's really important for the future, for addressing the issues that you're talking about today, that NIFA be located in the Washington, D.C. area. Now, groups such as those that I work with do find this important. We work with other agencies throughout USDA. We work with other trade organizations. We work with Congress. And being able to visit them in a single visit is much more effective, much more efficient. If NIFA is moved from the capital region, it's likely that there will be less input into the agency. We're also very concerned about the loss of staff. It is a real concern, losing the expertise that exists there. I can speak to this from personal experience. I was with the American Farm Bureau Federation at their headquarters in Park Ridge. When it was consolidated into the Washington, D.C. office, half of the staff that worked in the area was lost. And we see that as a major issue that we really want to raise up and have considered as it moves forward. Results of the loss of staff are things that cannot be filled immediately, and so it would have a significant negative impact on the ability to answer the questions that are being asked today. So it also has potential large negative impacts on funding for research in both the short and intermediate term. Now, FASS, Science Policy Committee that I work with, serves as a voice for animal agriculture that reaches from the test tube to the table. We embrace all of animal agriculture. Now, while most sections of production agriculture are currently facing financially challenging times, research is critical for the future well-being of both producers and consumers. We support a research portfolio that's balanced in funding for animal and plant work, as well as between intramural and extramural research. ERS studies confirm that the plant and animal sectors are basically equal as far as the income generated, but if we look at the research funding that's directed in different directions, or to the two sectors, that is not the case. Now, we've worked with that in the past. Progress has been made, but it's something that we certainly continue to push the need to address. I would point you to a paper, Funding Equity for Animal Science Research, 2014, a report to the National Academies of Science by Russell Cross and co-workers at Texas A&M, as well as various ERS studies for more detail. Now, FASS works with others in an effort to obtain additional funding for ag research. We recognize it's critical, it's been raised before, but we do need to raise the level of funding for agricultural research. USDA, I recognize, does not set the budget, but it is important that USDA be a leader in pushing for increased funding rather than accepting decreased funding for it. So we urge that to be a part of the program as well. Now, NIFA and ARS, working with research components and other agencies, have a long history of effectively seeking and using stakeholder input. This has been done through targeted stakeholder sessions. I think they've been very effective. I've had the pleasure of participating in a number of those, and we certainly urge that that be done. Sessions such as this are important for identifying broad areas, but we need to have that additional detail that goes into really identifying what the critical areas are. It's important that we bring together multiple disciplines to address the issues. And one area that may need greater attention in the future is the use of big data and precision agriculture. I think that's something that goes across the various sectors, but something that we recognize it's needed. The process of working through national program areas and assuring collaboration between the research arms of USDA serves well in identifying the knowledge gaps and research needed to fill those gaps. So we encourage that that sort of activity be continued for the future. FAST has worked to identify a range of areas that are needed, focus areas that fit into the broad spectrum of things. And three of those that come to mind are food security, basically assuring an adequate supply of safe and healthy food for a growing world population. Second is One Health, looking at all aspects of the intersection between animal and human health. And the final is stewardship, or caring for the environment and the well-being of animals. We would again note that big data will be an important component across all these areas, but the bottom line is that our research efforts must have an overall objective of providing a safe, secure, affordable food supply for all in a responsible manner. An integrated, evidence-based systems approach that's based on science will be an important component of all these. We look forward to continuing to work with you to identify the needs and work in the specific areas of that. FAST is a strong advocate for that, and communicating with the public, we encourage opportunities to work together to do that. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll do one more speaker before break. Linda Kinkle from the University of Minnesota.
So I have some slides. Excellent. I'm Linda Kinkle. I'm a professor in the Department of Plant Pathology at the University of Minnesota. And today I'm here representing the American Phytopathological Society. We're a society of over 4,500 members globally, and our research focuses on stresses, in particular pathogens, abiotic stresses, and the roles of microbes in plant health. And our goal is to not only develop foundational knowledge in this space, but to translate that information to enhance productivity and sustainability of agroecosystems. In response to the NIFA listening session opportunity, we surveyed our national and international membership. We got over 300 responses from US members, and I'm summarizing those for you today. So the first question, what's the greatest challenge? And our membership who responded to our survey really were responding to two distinct poles that are pulling our research at this point. One is the tremendous challenge to feed the growing world population. As we hurtle towards 9 to 11 billion people over the next 50 to 100 years, how do we feed these people when we can't make land? And at the same time, we recognize the limits of our environmental resources to support agriculture, and especially the potential negative, not the potential, and real negative impacts of agriculture on the environment. So in response to these two poles pushing our research, collectively, the greatest challenge among our members was really articulated as our challenge to increase the productivity and resilience as a distinct attribute of our systems, while simultaneously working aggressively to reduce the negative environmental impacts of agriculture. Within this greatest challenge, our membership responses really coagulate into 4 distinct top priorities for NIFA investments. One top priority is integrated management of agricultural microbiomes and plant genetics to increase productivity and resilience of agroecosystems. NIF has done an outstanding job in developing some explicit lines of support for microbiome research. This is a huge space of investment, both in the federal government, but also in private industry. We think those substantial investments need to continue because the gaps in our foundational knowledge are significant. Similarly, NIFA funding has helped advance novel approaches to advancing plant genetics, including use of CRISPR technologies. We think these foundational investments need to continue, but we don't wait until we know everything before we start putting these pieces together on the ground. So we urge also integration of managing approaches for microbiomes and plant genetics across environments to support agroecosystem productivity. A second priority within our community is enhanced bases for predicting emergent and re-emergent plant pathogens. Global commodity movement, changes in the environment, and changes in management practices have led to some significant threats from emergent or re-emergent pathogens. You can think of citrus greening, soybean rust, stem rust UG99, Phytophthora ramorum in California. Many of our highly valuable crops, but also natural habitats, are threatened by emergent and re-emergent pathogens. We believe that significant investments are needed in the basic science to understand the ecology and epidemiology of emergent pathogens, but also the development of rapid diagnostics to let us respond more quickly to emergent pathogens across the landscape, especially in cropping production systems, are needed. Another priority for our society is increased resources for forest health. Forests are being devastated by increasing temperatures and reduced rainfall in many areas. We see this in diseases and insect outbreaks, and many of these then translate to devastating forest fires. At the same time that we see these major impacts on forest health, we've seen reductions in the number of forest pathology graduate programs nationally and reduced national and state investments in forest health. We urge new investments in forest health and forest research across the country. And finally, our fourth priority for research, extension, and education is in making sure that we continue and increase investments in the National Plant Disease Diagnostic Network. This is the national networks of diagnostic labs that's really the first line of defense when we think of emergent pathogens, but also when we think about where are the major disease challenges in the growing season. The sooner we have good national information, the better we are at responding with management. Early management reduces impacts. So National Plant Disease Diagnostic Network, second priority in this space is workforce training. Academic training often doesn't give students the on-the-ground, in-field experiences that students and industry seeks. We urge USDA to invest in workforce training, especially in the lines of offering internship programs for students from undergrad through graduate and postdoctoral research opportunities. And finally, what about the breakthroughs? Where are the breakthroughs that will really be game changers in our field? One thing that's critical for us, we believe, is in-field, real-time, on-the-ground diagnostics. What's wrong with this plant? What's wrong in this field? Again, rapid detection means we can make management decisions sooner. Early management decisions can reduce impacts on the environment. So we need advances in these technologies sooner rather than later. And finally, databases. This has been mentioned by a few others. We need support for database generation, database accessibility. Databases are critical to integrating and synthesizing the large volumes of agricultural microbiome and crop productivity and soil health data on a national and international scale. We're lacking in databases that can drive us forward. We need support for analyses of these data. This includes advances in our analytic capacity, but also training for students, faculty, postdocs to become adept at training these or analyzing these large-scale data sets, and finally in translating these data to solutions. Collectively, we think these priorities and these technology breakthroughs will be critical to achieving the grand challenge that we've posed. And finally, I want to go off my slides briefly and echo Kent's comments. In our society, there's enormous concern about the move of NIFA staff and headquarters out of the DC area. Our society, as many societies, regularly travel to Washington to meet with NIFA staff as well as NSF, EPA congressional representatives, we're deeply concerned that the move of the NIFA headquarters away from DC will reduce access, opportunities for input, NIFA's impact on policy making and policy decisions in the DC area, and will also result in the loss of extraordinarily valuable staff, which will compromise the agency. At the end of the day, we really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, and we hope that our comments are helpful. Thank you.
All right, because this is being broadcast, we are going to do one more speaker before the break. If Kent Olson is here, thank you.
Got some slides there. Thank you. I'm Kent Olson. I'm an Associate Dean for the Extension Center for Community Vitality here at Minnesota. I grew up on a farm in Iowa. I went through the Iowa State system, worked in farm management for years, a professor both in California and here in Minnesota. But over that time growing up, I started to realize how important the community is, the rural community is, as part of that production system. So I'm pleased to be part of that and working on the community side. So I'm kind of speaking for the communities here at this session today. We are very thankful for the funding that NIFA puts into communities, that USDA puts in, both in DC and in out in the States, how it helps out, how we work at there. And what I want to talk about is some of the things we see from our viewpoint. The greatest challenge, a lot of change going on in these rural communities. So the greatest challenge is just kind of understanding what those trends are, where that might be pointing out, and how to adapt. The demographics, as you know, an aging population probably, but we also have people not only just moving out of rural communities, we have people moving in. Who are they? What are they? One very beneficial grant we have from NIFA going on right now in our center is looking at newcomers. What's happening? Who are they? Why are they moving? How are they integrating themselves into those communities? How can we work with them? How can they participate? But there are some cultural challenges, shall we say. So we're also looking at, as part of this grant, or coming out of that grant that's made possible by NIFA, is how can they adjust, how can they incorporate, help out in the new cultures. The greatest part of this greatest challenge is also just the economics. What's going on, what's happening, how can they adjust to all that, the greater economy, but yet still have a viable economy locally. As you know, probably, there's a lot of farmers, even large farms, where the main farmer or one of the farm family has an off-farm job. That's very critical to the quality of life for that farm family. So how can we help with that community in order to keep that job or those jobs there locally to do that, to keep that second job there? And the diverse economy within those rural communities also helps sustain that community, so that it's not just a boom and bust with agriculture. There are other industries there too. This is some data from 2014 looking at the grid. The hash marks says in this region of Minnesota, the hash marks indicate that like the manufacturing industry is within the top 3 for employment. The colored, the gold, whatever we want to call that color, that it's in the top 3 in output, sales. Manufacturing, both in sales and employment, important. What surprised us was the importance of services within each region. Health, government, any kind of service entity, the hotels. If you think of Minnesota as tourism, you can understand why part of that's there, both in output and input. But agriculture on the western side of Minnesota is important, or in the top 3. Still important in other areas, but not in the top 3. And if we look at more recent data, yet unpublished, still kind of we're grinding through some of the data from 2017, the importance of manufacturing increases. The employment in the top 3 for agriculture is decreasing some, probably both due to manufacturing recovering from the recession, more so than agriculture, and agriculture having some tough times right now with low prices. So the yin and the yang of the economy and fluctuation. But still recognizing that there's more in those communities than just agriculture, and it's important for the sustainability, the diversity of those local economies. Most needed breakthroughs are just trying to identify ways that communities can adapt. How can we welcome these new residents? Not just immigrants from other countries, but immigrants from, in our case, Minneapolis, St. Paul, refugees from Minneapolis, St. Paul, the urban life. Some of them come with their own job. We call them the 1099s, the IRS form. They have retirement income, they have other jobs, consultants, telecommunications, how to get them integrated and become part of that community, and how to help the long-term residents adjust to these new residents, and that they're not quite the same as they're used to. Another part, transitioning rural businesses, there's something like over 60% of Main Street businesses are owned and operated by people very close or past retirement age. How can that community, as a community, help them transition that business to a new generation, to keep that hardware store, to keep that restaurant in that area versus just the community having their hands off? How can we help them along? And NIFA people are doing that, helping us out here, as well as giving this grant to look at how to do that. And just that basic stable funding source that helps us keep people around. Another breakthrough is just helping these communities know and grow their assets. Instead of just having a woe is me, life is going bad out here in rural areas, well, what do we have that people are interested in? How can we use these parks? How can we use these rural areas to attract people to come and live and increase that? And the top priority we would have is just looking at that improving quality of life. How can we help with the economy? And part of this is in the midst of all the needs for agriculture, don't forget communities as we go through your ration process, as we talk to our Congress people. Looking at the economy, housing, broadband, health, how can we improve those to keep that local economy thriving, growing, so that that community can be sustainable in the future and remain part of that agricultural production system. So it's not just tractors and fertilizer and genetics. There's all kinds of other things that are going on that need to be part of that system. I have that last part down there. Provide hope, decrease despair. Some of those, the lack of jobs, the lack of view, the lack of hope gets people into that, what they call diseases of despair. Call it addiction, the opioids. If we can help understand, help these communities adjust, we can pull people out of that disease and give them some hope for the future. And NIFA is certainly a big part of that process. In summary, what our mission is and what I think we can look at is how can we help communities choose and create their desired futures. We do this both in community economics, community development, leadership training, civic engagement training, tourism, dealing with all of that. How can we help them decide what they want to do and create for their own future? So thank you.
Thank you. So next we're going to take a break. We're going to break till 10:30, and I invite anyone that hasn't signed in to do so, especially if you would like to add your name to the agenda. We'll have plenty of time to hear from anyone that's in the room, so it'd be great to know a little bit ahead of time, but we can add speakers as we go. We'd also like to take a photo of the group that's here today, so please come on up to the front in a couple minutes and we will do a group photo and enjoy some of the refreshments, and we'll reconvene at 10:30. Thank you.
Leadership training, civic engagement training, tourism, dealing with all of that. How can we help them decide what they want to do and create for their own future? So thank you.
Thank you. So next we're going to take a break. We're going to break till 10:30, and I invite anyone that hasn't signed in to do so, especially if you would like to add your name to the agenda. We'll have plenty of time to hear from anyone that's in the room, so it'd be great to know a little bit ahead of time, but we can add speakers as we go. We'd also like to take a photo of the group that's here today, so please come on up to the front in a couple minutes and we will do a group photo and enjoy some of the refreshments, and we'll reconvene at 10:30. Thank you.